Pillay for guidance and want to speak to her about our things that are very close to our hearts. But I want to warn you now that I am going to be asking people to keep their questions and comments brief. And I do that on behalf of all of us so that more people can speak and so that we can hear from our distinguished guests. So with that warning, I invite you to come to the microphone if you have a question. And again, I remind you to keep it as brief as you can. And so maybe I'll take 3 questions and then I'll turn the microphone over to to Navi Pillay. That's okay, Doctor. Thank you to our very gracious guest, Dr. Pillay, to give some answers. So, please.
Hello, ma'am. I'm not asking you whether you would have delayed the release of the OHCHR report on Sri Lanka, the OISL report. I'm not going to ask you that. Only to tell you that that was a setback, ending in a new resolution for a domestic investigation. Nevertheless, let's quickly fast forward to the present. And I am Ushasri Skandaraja, and I'm from the TGTE. And at our annual Human Rights Conference last week, we had a very distinguished panel who discussed transitional justice. And they had a very grim view, they took a very grim view on Sri Lanka's ability to deliver transitional justice. And what they did was they called actually for concrete action towards demilitarization and a halt to the ongoing human rights violations. But most importantly, they called for extensive changes in the Sri Lankan state apparatus. They wanted a change in the Sri Lankan government's attitude, as well as changes in Sri Lanka's legal and judicial systems, laws, policies and practices, bringing it to international standards with a view to carrying forward transitional justice initiatives and a full implementation of the 2015 resolution, including witness protection and participation of foreign judges, prosecutors, investigators, defense counsels, and in order to establish an independent, impartial, victim-centered accountability mechanism. Since then, since the new Sirisena government took over, they have actually learned the art of double speak. In other words, although they have been co-sponsors of the resolution, their statements recently are ambiguous and inconsistent with the resolution. So this does not augur well for transitional justice and in the delivery of especially justice for the victims of genocide. And so I would like you to comment on what the future holds and the different scenarios that you foresee in this regard. Thank you.
For the question. So we'll take another question before we turn to our guests.
Hi, my question is also on Sri Lanka, but my question is how Sri Lanka is contextualized and compared to other situations in which we talk about transitional justice and accountability. Unlike other countries, Sri Lanka is a bit unique because the transition we speak of is really sort of changing the head of the body but not changing the body itself. And I guess my question is, how does that factor into any kind of accountability mechanism we decide to use going forward, given that there isn't really too much of a transition in the way we've seen in Rwanda or Yugoslavia?
So we have about 20 minutes for the question and answer session. So if you could please keep your question as brief as possible, we would appreciate it.
First, let me congratulate the High Commissioner. The hospitality enjoyed with the brothers.
Close the mic, please. Close to mic.
Let me first congratulate you and thank you for your brothers and sisters, the hospitality I enjoyed in 2009 when I was in South Africa when I launched on hunger strike. Now coming to the problem dealing with this, I'm just making a comparative study. We do not anyway belittle or decry the struggle of South African people, the colored people against the white domination. But comparing the South African struggle with ours,
to a hybrid court of having international components, and of course the present government has made it clear they don't want any international involvement. So I'm glad you didn't ask me the question, because I support the current High Commissioner, who was advised by the 3 experts whom I put in there. The resolution, you must understand, was very weak that was adopted, but it had to be like that in order to get the sufficient number of votes. And that's why the language came down and down. But we squeezed in. You know, our High Commissioner had to do the investigation. So we didn't get a resolution asking an independent commission to investigate. That's what we got for DPRK, which followed soon after that. That's what we got for Syria or for the Gaza investigation. We could not get that for Sri Lanka, because these are political bodies, as you know, the UN, and that's a decision they made. But we squeezed in a sentence that I could call for experts. And so we appointed 3 experts as advisors. As you know, the former Chief Justice of New Zealand, Sylvia Cartwright, was a judge in the Cambodian court, and Marty Hattisari, former Prime Minister of Finland, and Asma Jahangi, Special Rapporteur, and also a famous advocate from Pakistan. I got a letter from the then Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. They were furious with me. Why did you have to appoint such high-level people as advisors? So I want you to see what this is about. Every step is a struggle. You have to have a strategy. If that wasn't done by people outside, like Gary and Karina, for instance, and my staff, we wouldn't have got where we were. So it was essential that the diaspora work with governments outside. So you got at least one resolution adopted. Now you gave the criteria for transitional justice. Yes, I support all of that, because you have to keep the bar up there. You don't begin with a compromise. Anyway, I just want to finish that. High Commissioner Zayed was advised by the 3 experts to give the extension of time to the new government, hoping that they will cooperate. So he followed advice there. This is what we also struggle with, all the issues on transitional justice. So we demand what people deserve, what's in the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration. It's not always practical that you achieve that. But human rights defenders know to place the bar up there. Many times in the high-level bodies chaired by the Secretary General, that's exactly what I would do. I would say, these should be all the demands for Afghanistan, for instance. And they said, why do you have to ask for everything? Just talk about peace now. And I said, I'm asking for everything that you put in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I wish you well with that transitional justice scenario. We didn't achieve that in South Africa at various levels. President Mandela had to compromise because we were working with the apartheid government still. And that's why we didn't have prosecutions or a tribunal. However, I agree with the last speaker. You cannot compare the situations in different countries. Some aspects may be the same. So you can't plant a transitional justice model that worked in one country into another. South Africa followed the model in Peru, for instance. We did have an amnesty court. the president of that amnesty court was a judge, Hassan Mala, who himself had been banned, house arrested. And he told me how he hated granting amnesty to perpetrators of apartheid violence. So that's what I mean. If the TRC in South Africa was a politically expedient solution, it worked because the people accepted it as something that they must accept in order to move forward. They were interested in building a nation and building a country. I know that Archbishop Desmond Tutu, immediately after the Rwandan genocide, was speaking in Rwanda when he told them, you should have a TRC like we had in South Africa. And that whole audience told Desmond Tutu, you had dealt with racism there. We are dealing with genocide here, and we want criminal justice. So, crucially then, it has to be something, a model that people are willing to accept. But human rights defenders, as I say, should ask for what victims and survivors want. They want justice and accountability. Now, clearly, I am in no position to answer your 3 questions on the fact that Sri Lankan conflict is deep. But let me say to you, sitting outside here in Canada, that those people in Sri Lanka are looking to you to help them strategize and come up with ideas. So you have to ensure that their voices are heard outside here. I looked at this land question in there as well, and truly appreciate, and that's why I made my remarks about military structures being built over Tamil lands, being built over cemeteries and so on. So otherwise, it's very, very difficult for an outsider to dictate a solution to the country. And of course, yeah, the second question, it's very difficult when you don't have a cooperative government, who don't have the political will to address justice and accountability, maybe because they're afraid that it will come too close to them. So they have reasons to avoid the justice process. I would say we have to keep demanding what is just. One of the witnesses many of the witnesses in the Rwanda tribunal said to us judges, we waited for this day to see justice being done. That's a point of view. I went to Guatemala when they were a forensic team was very slowly examining bones and so on to identify the victims. And all the victims' families were there, still weeping, still waiting for the disappeared to be identified. I think 4 or 6 were successfully identified because of that very careful examination of bones. And that is many, many years after the military had committed atrocities in Guatemala. And the Cambodian court, let me say, only happened 20 years after the event. I'm not saying that Sri Lankans should be patient and wait that long, but at least be practical when you help the people in Sri Lanka to devise solutions. Thank you.
I think we have time for, we have about 10 more minutes, so I think we see some people at the microphone.
Take mic, please. Mic.
Sorry. Were there some people who had questions on this side? I think yes, and you there, and then one here. So I'll take these 3. Guna, did you have a question? Okay. Can you work out amongst yourselves who was there first? Please look behind you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Guna Devi. I am a PhD student here at Osgood, and before that I'm a Syrian human rights lawyer as well, who fought for freedom in Syria, and I had to leave like a year and a half after the war because what I want to say, or what I want to describe as the lack of humanitarian protection in Syria, and I really So my question to you, so it's the lack of the humanitarian protection for Syrian citizens. So you were addressing, or you were telling us about your letter to the to refer the Syrian atrocities to the ICC, along with 60 countries. So, but this is again depends on the Security Council's approval. So it's again like any other political action has to have like political will. So my question to you, whether you are aware of any other legal or solution that Syrian human rights lawyers can approach to hold perpetrators of the Syrian crisis accountable. Thank you.
On the question of strategy, you said, and I think Harney paraphrased, you're saying intellectualizing the struggle. One of the things the Tamil communities, the Elam Tamil community did historically during 2009 was a lot of direct action. I remember there was one action trying to email you, and I think we downed your email server at one point. Like actions like that. Now, how should that be incorporated within the strategy with the intellectualizing and the research and the information and the dissemination? Was that counterproductive? Because there's a lot of protests at the UN headquarters, at New York, in front of embassies, etc., where like there's mass mobilization. Are you critical of those mobilizations? Were they counterproductive, or did they play like a possible role in maybe pressuring the UN to be more responsive and maybe getting some reforms within the UN bureaucracy?
Thank you. So we'll take one question here, and do you choose? Okay, so I'm going to ask you again to please keep it as brief as possible.
Modern-day war criminals and dictators are very smart because they know what happened to Daniel Noriega, Saddam Hussein, and Hitler, because they were all stupid. So the modern-day dictators, they know how to play the superpowers one against the other. Currently, there are many superpowers. Sri Lanka is doing the same thing. They have been doing that since 1948, right? So now, US has abandoned the Tamil side. They are not going to worry about that much as long as there is a pro-Western government or not anti-Western government there. How do we proceed with that? Combined with the lack of unity, leadership, and direction from our side, when it comes to dealing with international powers, we are kind of infants. We are not doing any effective work. How can we proceed, and which country can we approach in the UN Human Rights Commission to take our course?
Again, as brief as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. So there's two questions. One, and this is not about Sri Lanka. From your view, was the state of human rights better in the world when you left than before it started? So did human rights become better or worse during your tenure? And what were some shortcomings of your offices that led to that? If it decreased, what are some of the shortcomings, and how can they be reformed? That's the question.
Thank you. And last question then. Thank you very much for keeping these brief.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. I wanted to ask about what you would say to people who have lost faith in the international processes that have occurred. What has happened since the change in government in Sri Lanka, the international community now being a lot more positive in their engagement, restarting military engagement and other things. What would you say to the significant portion of the community who are now disillusioned with international processes in gaining accountability?
Thank you so much for those four really excellent questions. Dr. Pillay has about 5 minutes to answer those. So I will invite her and I will give you a minute.
I agree. These are all very important questions. They will continue to occupy my mind because I also learn from dialogue such as this on what we should be thinking about. Let me say a little bit of my background. There are published remarks where I was totally against any kind of compromise when we were devising our constitution. So in other words, I was very critical of President Mandela But now I see that some of the moves he was forced to make actually benefited us to get from there to here. We haven't ended our struggle. There are many lawyers still claiming compensation for victims, and there are young people who actually, well, there was a lone voice, I think, saying Mandela was a traitor because he sold out on the rights of ordinary people to land and jobs and so on. So it's an ongoing process. I too have learned that from the beginning we cannot say all or nothing. We accept what we get and we use those as tools to get to where we want to go. But please don't even think that I'm an expert on all this. I'm not. Now, as a Syrian human rights lawyer, let me empathize with your struggles. Yeah, where are you? I have gone public before the Security Council and said the Syrian situation is the worst failure on the part of the United Nations. We have this wonderful framework, and there cannot be greater violations of human rights, humanitarian law, human rights law. 200,000 killed, that's the figure I left with, that's by name and the place where they died. And millions, 4 million children alone displaced. How can we even say we have a United Nations when we turn a blind eye to this? And so I continue to call for justice and accountability for all Syrians. And I've heard from women who came out of Syria. They recently had an opportunity to be at the UN. And I go from here to the United Nations to address a panel on justice and accountability, because there's a real danger that those two important demands will not be addressed by the Geneva peace talks. If they continue to make peace with individuals who we consider are serious perpetrators of international crime, then what kind of peace is that? So that's what I will be doing. I encourage you to do the same. That's what I would agree with your language. These are the legal resources and the tools at our disposal to hold perpetrators to account. There is an initiative led by the French government, which many states are supporting now, which is to convince the P5 not to use the veto in situations where there have been grave human rights violations or atrocity crimes. So if there's sufficient support for that by all governments, and if the General Assembly supports it, that would be a good measure to get the P5, I mean, I think it's impossible to get them to give up this veto, but at least not to use it. It's, to me, completely unacceptable that they use a veto when we are telling them. I was there soon after 1,000 peaceful protesters were shot by the Assad government, just for demanding their civil and political, economic, social rights. So instead of talking with the peaceful protesters, they shot them. And that's when I first addressed the Security Council. So what I'm saying here, forthright criticism is very, very important. So even though we disillusion with the state of the world, of course we realize in South Africa, for instance, that the wealth of the country belongs to the West. Gold mines and so on were owned by Anglo-American. So we saw the big picture. We still prodded at ending racial discrimination. It was a step to getting to a proper sharing of all rights in our country. Good time for what? Let me tell you, all your research and your emails are very, very important. The Secretary General reads them. He meets with NGOs. So when you're sitting in a position of power where you can do something, you can well forget about some issue because there's a crisis piling onto our desks all the time. So your emails and your statistics and research are very, very important. And they're very important for victims in the country because they can't shout as loud as you, but they can put out the statistics or notes that you've come up with. It is difficult when we're dealing with dictators. There are many in Africa, for instance. There are the largest number of journalists in prison in Ethiopia just for criticizing the government. So there are some terrible places in the world. I think, to me, that's a bigger reason why we should care and help them as far as we can. Are human rights better or worse in the world? I would have said they are better, except there is the Syria situation, which is ongoing, and it's as I said, it's a failure on our part. It's caused the flow of refugees. What I do say is we have better mechanisms to address it now than we had before. We never had an international criminal court to render justice where states fail to render justice. We have it now. And we have social media, so we can spread our messages to all people. Young people and people everywhere are speaking in terms of rights now. They're speaking of right to food, right to water, right to health. These were unheard of before. When I started, I was told not to touch economic and social rights because these are aspirations and not rights. So we've made some progress in empowering people. I think that addresses all the questions so far. All right, that's what I have time for. Thank you very much for your questions.
So just before I hand over the microphone, let me thank you very much for your excellent questions, and Dr. Pillay for trying to address the really difficult places where our approach to human rights and our pragmatism have to come together. So thank you very much.